Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving headfirst into, well, one of the biggest questions there is, isn't it? What happens after we die?
It really is the ultimate unknown, something humans have grappled with forever.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we've pulled together a really interesting stack of sources. We've got personal stories, people claiming contact with loved ones who've passed.
And also research discussions, even perspectives, looking critically at things like mediumship.
It's quite a mix. These sources tackle it from different angles, but there's a definite lean towards reported experiences, personal accounts of communication.
Yeah, it gives a specific lens on how people process loss and think about connection after death.
So our mission, as always, is clear. We're sticking to these sources. We want to unpack what they tell us about these experiences, the claims people make, and how folks in this material seem to understand it all. No outside info, no taking sides.
Exactly, just exploring what's in this particular set of accounts and discussions.
Okay, then, let's unpack this. Where do we start? Maybe with the actual phenomena people report, the connections they think they're having.
Sounds good. A lot of the material centers on what gets called after-death communication, or ADC.
Right.
And these aren't just abstract concepts in the sources, they're concrete reports, people convinced they've had contact.
And it seems like there are so many different ways this reported contact happens, not just one thing.
That's right, it really spans the senses and different states of mind, according to these accounts. Let's take visual stuff first.
Okay.
The sources talk about people reporting seeing images, sometimes even like full figures of loved ones.
And where do they see these?
Could be anywhere, really. Mirrors, windows, photos are mentioned, sometimes just sort of there in the air.
Wow.
And it can happen with eyes open or closed, sometimes during meditation or similar states. One source actually calls these twilight experiences.
Ah, like those moments when you're drifting off to sleep or waking up?
Exactly. Or praying, meditating. The idea presented is that maybe the connection is, easier in those states.
That sort of makes intuitive sense. And speaking of altered states, dreams come up a lot too, right? But they're described differently.
Yes, definitely. The term used is sleep ADCs, and the accounts consistently say they feel different from regular dreams.
How so?
More real, like exceptionally vivid, colorful, intense, and crucially, often involving clear, two-way conversations that feel totally logical at the time.
Unlike normal dream logic, yeah.
Right. We see examples like Rita Highsmith's dream, Tanya's phone dream, Elizabeth Johnson's encounter. The feeling described is often one of a genuine visit, not just your brain processing stuff.
You're almost hyper-real. What about experiences where people feel they actually leave their body?
Yeah, the sources cover out-of-body ADCs too. These are claims where someone feels their consciousness separates from their physical body
And goes somewhere.
and travels to visit loved ones. The places described are often beautiful, vivid, full of light and love, an ocean, a field of flowers. The material connects these sometimes to meditation or practices like astral projection.
Okay, so visual, dreams, out of body.
Yeah.
What about just hearing things or actual conversations?
Auditory communication is definitely in there. And some reports are surprisingly specific, like telephone calls.
From the deceased.
That's the claim. Phone rings, they answer, and it's the loved one. Sometimes conversation happens. Voice might sound near or far. There's this one anecdote from Sandy Griso, a call allegedly from a deceased relative using her sleeping father's phone right around the time the relative passed. It highlights that specificity and timing people report.
Wow, yeah, that's specific is the word. What about less direct ways of hearing messages?
Telepathic communication gets mentioned. One commenter, Jade, suggests this is common, though maybe the message needs some interpretation, can feel a bit strange translated into words.
Like a feeling or knowing rather than actual words.
Could be. And then there's EVP, electronic voice phenomena.
Ah, like recordings.
Yeah, one account from John Carlo describes using an iPhone recorder and capturing what he believes are his parents' voices. Whispers, loud voices, even robotic-sounding ones. Sometimes saying things like, "I loved you," or "Happy birthday."
So communication isn't just hearing a voice out loud. It can be internal or even captured technologically, according to these reports.
Exactly, and it moves into other senses too. Physical signs, sensory stuff, like smells.
Oh, right. I remember reading about that. Specific sense.
Absolutely. And they can be incredibly evocative for people. Reports of smelling, perfume, cologne, coffee, cigarette smoke scents, strongly associated with the person.
Things you wouldn't expect to smell right then and there.
Precisely. Some accounts mention the smell being quite strong, lingering even. a really potent sense of presence for the person experiencing it.
And what about actually feeling something, like being touched?
Yes, that's reported too. Feeling touched, hugged, embraced. Descriptions like feeling arms around them, warmth, a tingling sensation.
Like a physical comfort.
Mm-hmm. And there's also an interesting link some make between, say, getting chills down the spine and understanding a message. A physical reaction tied to comprehension.
Ah.
And that one account from Gudu, feeling pain in her arm where her father had Parkinson's pain, interpreted as a sign from him, suggesting maybe some kind of persistent physical echo.
It's those really personal, specific details again. They seem key. What about objects or electrical things?
Yep, both come up. Finding objects unexpectedly, brooches, coins, or things associated with the person, like feathers appearing on a path.
Signs people look for, maybe?
Or interpret as signs when they happen,
Yeah.
And electrical stuff, flickering lights, TVs going on or off, answering machines acting up. People in the
Sure.
sources often see these not as random faults, but as, like, intentional pokes, attempts to communicate.
Interacting with the physical world that way. And the last category feels a bit more symbolic, maybe? Animals? Numbers?
A very common theme in the sources. Rainbows seen as reassurance that the loved one is okay. Linked to memories sometimes. Animals are huge. Specific birds, cardinals, doves, hummingbirds, or butterflies, dragonflies. People report them appearing at significant times or places and feeling it's a deliberate message, a visit.
Like a messenger.
Exactly. And numbers too, seeing numbers connected to the deceased, like a birth year or jersey number, repeatedly. It's all interpreted within that framework of receiving signs.
Okay, so that's a huge range of reported experiences. Visual, auditory, sensory, symbolic.
It really paints a picture of potential connection from many different angles based on these accounts.
So the next logical step is, what do these reports, taken together, suggest about where the deceased are? Or what that state is like? What's the other side look like in these sources?
Well, it's not one single picture, but there are recurring themes. Especially from those out-of-body accounts, the description is often of a place that's incredibly real, vivid, beautiful.
Filled with light and love, I think you mentioned.
Yes, that comes up frequently. Sense of heightened reality, almost more real than here.
But is it just one place? Or do the sources suggest different possibilities?
There's some variety. One comment suggested maybe it's a dimension close to Earth's, except non-physical. What some might call the astral plane, maybe for souls still feeling connected here.
Okay.
But then you also see discussion, like on Reddit, raising the idea of multiple afterlives existing at once. Hades, Nirvana, heaven, hell, Elysium, all possibly coexisting. So it's not presented as just one single destination in all accounts.
Interesting. And what about the state of the people in these realms? Are they okay, aware?
That is probably the most consistent message reported across the sources. Overwhelmingly, the communications are described as conveying that the deceased are okay, at peace, well, safe.
That must be incredibly comforting for the living.
Absolutely. And that they're aware of us, aware of what's happening here, that awareness is key.
One area that's always sensitive is the idea of judgment or hell. How do these sources handle that?
The Reddit discussions get into this quite directly. Some mediums or experiencers quoted there suggest the traditional idea of, like, a fiery hell doesn't really exist, as described.
So what happens instead, according to them?
The idea presented is more that people might create their own difficult reality after death, based on unresolved guilt, negativity, holding on to anger, essentially punishing themselves or staying stuck in a bad mental state.
Like a self-imposed hell, almost. A state of mind.
That's the perspective offered in these specific sources.
Yeah.
And linked to that is this powerful idea of forgiveness.
Forgiveness being key to moving on.
Exactly. Whether it's self-forgiveness or, receiving forgiveness from others, it's seen as crucial for getting out of that negative state.
And this connects to the idea that spirits see things differently after death.
Yes, definitely. Comments in the sources emphasize spirits gaining a whole new perspective, more understanding, which makes it easier for them to forgive. The real challenge highlighted is often for the living to forgive themselves.
So the work is often on this side.
That's the strong suggestion, dealing with our own regrets or unresolved issues.
What about spirits staying close? Is that seen as being trapped?
The idea comes up, spirits being near loved ones, sometimes called earthbound. But it's generally not framed negatively, like being trapped against their will. More often presented as a choice, maybe out of love or feeling needed.
Okay. And some sources even talked about life before this life.
There's one striking account of a life between life regression, describing meeting guides, feeling intense emotion, getting non-judgmental feedback on past life choices. It suggests consciousness existing in a purposeful way even before we're born into this life.
Fascinating. And consistently, do these reports suggest our personality, our core self, continues?
That's a very strong theme, yes. People describing loved ones as having the same personality, maybe looking younger or healthier. The core person is still recognizable.
Still them.
Right. Though it's worth noting, a few accounts suggest the deceased might be confused initially, maybe not realizing they've passed right away, so perhaps a transition period for some.
Okay, so whether we're talking about how contact happens or what the afterlife might be like, according to these reports, the sources really emphasize the impact these experiences have on the living, don't they?
Absolutely central. I mean, grief is universal, right? As one source points out, bereavement is a major life event, and grief is a natural healing process.
And these communications seem to play a huge role in that healing for the people reporting them.
Overwhelmingly, yes. The word that comes up again and again is comfort, peace, reassurance, helping people cope with that intense pain of loss.
Wow. By knowing their loved one is okay.
That seems to be the core of it. Getting that message that, like, they're okay, they're safe, they're at peace. We see it in so many comments. Laura feeling peace, Joe's comforting dream, Kathy feeling validated by the feathers and light, Lauren's fiancé visiting to reassure her. It eases the suffering.
And that theme of forgiveness comes back here too, focused on the living person.
Yes, it does. The experience itself seems to empower the living to let go of guilt, forgive themselves for things left unsaid or undone. It's not just about the deceased understanding more, it's about facilitating the living person's own process of self-forgiveness.
So it's actively helping them heal and maybe move forward in their own lives.
Exactly. It reinforces that feeling of continued connection, continued love. The relationship isn't over, it's just changed. That's a strong message in sources like your Tango and Jade's comments.
And sometimes the messages feel like guidance or even protection.
Yeah, there are examples like Sarah from Ireland feeling her cousin's visit was a warning, or Heather Mendoza interpreting the hummingbird sign as confirmation and care from her cousin. People read these signs as active, deliberate acts of guidance.
But the sources also make it clear this doesn't just magically erase the grief, right? People are still sad, still missing the person intensely.
Oh, absolutely. It's realistic about that. These are moments of comfort within the grieving process, not an instant fix for the sorrow. The longing, the tears, that's all still very much part of the picture painted in the sources.
And I guess psychologically, whether someone believes it's real spirit contact or not, the effect is real, the comfort it provides.
That's an important point the sources implicitly touch on. The psychological impact is undeniable. These experiences provide solace and can be a significant part of an individual's healing journey, regardless of the ultimate explanation.
Now, we spent a lot of time on these personal accounts, which are so powerful in the sources, but the material also includes a very different perspective, right? Skepticism.
Yes, and it's crucial for balance. While many people have these deeply convincing personal experiences, the sources also present critical views, especially regarding professional mediums and how communication might be faked or explained differently.
And this isn't new, is it? People like Houdini were involved.
That's right. The Adrian Salem magic source mentions figures like Houdini, who, being a magician himself, knew about illusion and trickery. He actively worked to expose what he saw as fraudulent mediums, demonstrating how effects could be achieved through natural means.
So, a history of questioning these claims. What kind of techniques do the sources say skeptics point to?
Two main ones are discussed: cold reading and hot reading.
Okay, what's cold reading?
That's where the medium uses very general statements, things that could apply to almost anyone, sometimes called Barnum statements. Then they watch the sitter's reactions very closely, body language, small cues, and use that feedback to gradually get more specific, making it seem like they have information they couldn't possibly know.
Ah, so it's based on observation and probability, really.
Kind of psychological fishing, yeah. Hot reading is simpler, though.
How does that work?
That's just getting information about the sitter before the reading, researching them online, talking to someone who knows them, whatever. Then they present that info during the session as if it's coming from a spirit.
Right, okay. So using deception. Did the sources mention any actual research trying to test mediums?
Yes. The investigation of mediums source describes one study. They tried to set up controlled conditions, using sitters the mediums didn't know, sometimes a proxy sitter to block information flow.
And what did it find?
Well, the source itself notes limitations, challenges in making it perfectly controlled, like fully blinding everyone involved. But it did report that in some cases, Mediums provided specific details that the sitters confirmed were accurate. So it highlights the complexity of trying to study this stuff rigorously.
Because getting that kind of repeatable scientific proof for something so subjective is just inherently difficult.
That's a key takeaway from the sources discussing evidence, yeah.
Yeah.
Personal subjective experiences are really hard to measure and replicate in a lab setting that satisfies strict scientific standards. The bar for scientific proof is different from the feeling of personal certainty.
So the sources kind of leave you with this tension, don't they, between the profound personal conviction many feel from these experiences?
And the difficulty of proving it objectively to satisfy scientific inquiry or skepticism.
Right. As that Darren Brown quote suggested, an experience can feel completely real and be incredibly helpful, especially when someone's grieving.
But that's different from it being scientifically proven as actual spirit contact. And for many people described in the sources, that personal experience is enough. They don't necessarily need or seek external validation. It's just two different ways of knowing or believing.
Wow. Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground from these sources. We went through all the different kinds of reported contact, seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling things, the symbolic signs.
And then looked at what those experiences might imply about an afterlife, peace, awareness, maybe even self-created states, and the role of forgiveness.
Yeah, and the huge impact these experiences have on grief, providing comfort and helping people heal even while the sadness remains.
And finally, balancing that with the perspective of skepticism, the history of investigating mediums, and the real challenges of finding objective proof for subjective events.
It really paints a picture of just how varied human experiences around death and loss and all the different ways we try to make sense of it all.
Through personal feelings, spiritual beliefs, rational investigation, it's all in there, in the sources.
So as you listening reflect on all this, the feeling of a hug from someone gone, the idea of needing to forgive yourself, the question of whether a sign is real or just coincidence, how does it sit with you? Does it challenge your own views or resonate with things you've maybe felt or wondered about?
It really highlights that deep human yearning for connection, for meaning, especially when we face mortality.
Which leads us to maybe a final thought to leave you with, drawn from everything we've unpacked today. Considering the sheer persistence of these reported connections across cultures and time, and the undeniable profound comfort they often bring to those grieving, what does that tell us about consciousness itself? Or about the power of love? Or maybe just the limits of what we currently understand about reality? Regardless of the ultimate explanation for these phenomena, what does their enduring presence and impact suggest?
It certainly leaves you thinking.
It does indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope exploring this material has given you some valuable things to consider.